you gonna bury damn near every friend you ever had, every nigga you ever ran with. This line is taken from a monologue at the end of episode 302, during the murder of Sal Baselli, courtesy of Marvin. But as with the whole of Raising Kanan, and Power in general, no line comes without some weight behind it. And there's a reason why they'd have grown Kanan recite this in context with the story that they've set before us. A younger Kanan currently has a best friend of his own in the form of Famous, his day one from season 1, and his last surviving friend, not bound by blood, considering that D-Wiz was taken out way back in season 1. But could Famous be joining him soon through a series of circumstances and left turns that would further push an up-and-coming Kanan in a more murderous direction? In this video, we'll explore such possibilities and predict just why and how Kanan could come to kill his beloved friend. Before we begin, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and bell notification to immediately receive these videos. Also, big thank you to all of my channel donors. If you'd like to be the next one, drop $1 on that Cash App for us. And lastly, a spoiler alert is now in effect for all things Power. Here we go. Sean Famous Figueroa, as I previously stated, is Kanan's last surviving friend. He was once a rapper of sorts, of the more local caliber, but did have a minor hit with Streets Need a Body. But outside of music, Famous has historically shown himself to be fun, comical, and as Detective Howard would once deem him as, a clown. He's not versed in the way of the streets, as Kanan and D-Wiz were. Sean is like the friend of the friend who puts in work in the streets. He's there to alleviate the angst of those burdens through comic relief. And in this capacity, Famous has operated for the past 2 seasons. In the latter half of season 2, going into this season, however, a shift took place. Kanan grew to understand how deceptive and manipulative his mother was being towards him, and it repelled him away from his mother physically. Famous, being his longtime friend, and also on the outs with his own family, provided a situation where the two would come together and lean on one another for survival. This is the predicament that we currently see the two in. On one side with Kanan, we see what Sam called a young pup evolving into that wolf before our very eyes. And as for Famous, he's been on a downward spiral ever since his music career took a turn. And not just any turn, but a turn for the worst. Now, this wasn't due to Famous not having the goods to pursue music, but it was his lack of motivation, ambition, and overall drive, which placed him in a depressed state. There was a line from season 2 in description of Famous where his sister was talking to Lulu. And in that conversation, Lulu spoke against his lack of motivation, proclaiming that if he would write rhymes, the beats would come. But Lou wasn't going to pick up any of the musical slack without a lyrical display first. But one thing he said in that conversation that was interesting was that all Famous wanted to do was smoke weed and get high all day. Because up to this point, that's all we see him do. Through characters like Simrad and Simrad's son, the word is out on Famous and his clouded tendencies. Even in episode 303, we see Kanan enter Famous's apartment only to find a bong on the table in the background and a sleeping Famous, not yet ready to take on life's challenges and preferring sleep over solidarity. Now, much has been made of Famous's potential to spiral down even further into the black hole that is addiction. We see these types of personalities fall to such a fate once their purpose for living is null and void. If we look back to the story of Sam, the once lovable crackhead of Raising Kanan prior to his demise, he stated that prior to being strung out, he was working on Wall Street in a white-collar position, making a lot of money and moreover, making a difference for his family. It wasn't until he took that first hit and fell further into the abyss that he lost everything in the process. Famous, unfortunately, is going down a similar route. His purpose for living, which in addition to school was his musical career, has been snatched from up under him. And because picking it back up hasn't come so easy to him, coupled with his own lazy nature, he's chosen the path most traveled, the path of least resistance, the path devoid of any wins, but abundant in losses. Even in Kanan's current drug hustle, we see Famous being forced to participate, unwilling to naturally help his friend achieve his goals. I mean, after all, Kanan had to literally slap Famous in order to get his mind on track. And that scene was interesting because, setting the disrespect aside, Famous was approaching Kanan as if another person's money gave him power. He was content in the possibility that he'd never have to work so long as Rock would come through with those monetary offerings in exchange for whatever she required of him. Famous was cool in that capacity because all of his basic needs were being met. And the best thing about it was, he didn't have to work for any of it. And that's the thing with Famous. He doesn't want to work. So in that moment when we see Kanan slapping him, many of us thought, well, hey, Kanan's treating him like a hoe. But in reality, Famous was acting like a hoe. Famous wanted to be well kept without doing any work to sustain that well-being. This brings us to the aftermath of that slap, or should I say, the ripple effects. To this point, Famous has displayed something that we know Kanan, both young and grown, despised, and that is weakness. Sure, to let another man slap you in your own home is weakness, but it's only his lack of respect for you that will precede such an action. Famous is the number 2 in this situation, and he's cool with being that. If you remember, way back in OG Power, when Kanan shot his son Sean, he said to him, and I quote, "I knew you couldn't kill Ghost because you're weak." Interestingly enough, Famous's real name is also Sean, and many believe that Kanan would name his son Sean after his best friend. But how poetic would it be that both of them would meet the same fate by the same gun of the same man? If Kanan does indeed end up killing Famous, then he would have been the first Sean to have been taken out by his bullet, and it would add more emotional weight to the second Sean he'd have to pull a trigger on, because like this one, it was someone that he loved, yet was too weak from a character perspective to maintain a place in his life. But how would Kanan come to do such a thing with Famous? Well, by Famous's eye not being on the ball and him being overtaken by his worst tendencies, that weakness is going to trickle out somehow and negatively affect Kanan in the episodes to come. Famous is going to do something that will directly impact Kanan's well-being and the well-being of his enterprise, and that is going to be something that Kanan can't forgive. Also, we do know that Kanan is graduating to Brick soon, as displayed by that still image of Ronnie Myers handing Kanan over a brick. Once we get to that juncture in Kanan's development, and given everything we know about Famous's drug dependency, would we see that very downward spiral in the form of a crack addiction with Famous? And if that takes place, that's something that would further damage Kanan's business. Whatever may come with the two friends, Kanan's hand is definitely going to be forced. And while we're on the subject of Ronnie, how would he factor into influencing Kanan to kill his friend? Ronnie is a no-nonsense, sociopathic, money-hungry individual. And once he gets a whiff of the weakness that Famous exudes, he could be the catalyst between Famous and his loss of life, because his savage tendencies are going to rub off on Kanan. And however their story goes, Kanan is going to pick up many a thing from Ronnie. And one thing we've only seen him hint at up to this point, but not fully walk in, is ruthlessness. And it takes ruthlessness to kill your best friend. We do see Kanan getting jammed up in this upcoming episode 4. In the trailer, a policeman is arresting Kanan for walking through what seems to be a security checkpoint at a school and getting caught with the unthinkable. Now, by Kanan's business being drugs, there's no way that would set off that alarm. So what's in his bag? Because it has to be something crazy, as we see Kanan later handcuffed to a chair. The question that should be at the forefront of all of our minds is, how does Famous factor in to this catastrophe? Because somehow, some way, Famous is involved. And unfortunately, in the eyes of this commentator, this will be the direct link to his downfall. But what are your thoughts on all of this? How do you think Famous's story will go from here? And will he survive season 3? Be sure to drop me your opinions in the comments below. As always, I thank you for watching today's video. If you liked today's video, go ahead and drop $1 on that Cash App for us, hit the like button, share it with your friends who are Power fans, and subscribe for more content such as this. This is Rudy P. Magic of Rudy P. Magic Beats, and have a blessed one until the next one. Peace, y'all.